Admiral Alvin Holsey just became the first black commander of U.S. Southern Command to be forced out of his position, only 1 year into a 3-year command. The Pentagon's official statement wished him well. But Admiral Holsey hadn't chosen to retire. According to multiple Pentagon sources, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth had forced him to step down. His offense? Questioning whether military strikes that had killed 87 people in the Caribbean were actually legal. This is the story of what happens when a decorated 4-star admiral asks the wrong questions to aspiring dictators. Alvin Holsey was born in 1965 in Fort Valley, Georgia, a small town in the heart of the Deep South, where hard work and education weren't just values, they were necessities for survival. Growing up black in Georgia during the 1970s and early 1980s meant navigating a world still scarred by Jim Crow, where success required not just talent, but an unwavering commitment to excellence that left no room for doubt. His family understood this reality and instilled in him the discipline and determination that would define his life. In 1984, Holsey enrolled at Morehouse College in Atlanta, the prestigious historically black institution that had produced Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Spike Lee, and countless other leaders who'd shaped American history. He pursued a degree in computer science while participating in the Naval Reserve Officers Training Corps, balancing the demands of a rigorous technical education with military training. When he graduated in 1988, he was commissioned as an ensign in the United States Navy. He joined Omega Psi Phi fraternity, continuing a legacy of black service and leadership that stretched back generations. His early Navy career was spent as a helicopter pilot, flying the SH-2F Sea Sprite and SH-60B Seahawk from the decks of destroyers and cruisers across the world's oceans. He deployed repeatedly, honing skills in anti-submarine warfare and counter-narcotics operations in the Caribbean and Latin America. By his own account, given during his Senate confirmation hearing in September 2024, his first deployment to the Southern Command area of responsibility came over 33 years earlier, conducting the same counter-drug missions that would eventually define his final days in uniform. The path from helicopter pilot to 4-star admiral is one that few officers travel. The Navy has thousands of pilots. It has only a handful of 4-star admirals at any given time. Holsey's rise through the ranks was methodical and earned through decades of flawless performance in increasingly demanding positions. He commanded Helicopter Anti-Submarine Squadron Light 37. He served as executive officer, then commanding officer of USS Makin Island, the Navy's first hybrid electric propulsion warship, a cutting-edge vessel that represented the future of naval technology. As a flag officer, he commanded Carrier Strike Group 1 aboard USS Carl Vinson, one of the Navy's nuclear-powered aircraft carriers, overseeing thousands of sailors and dozens of aircraft. In 2020, at a moment when the Navy was grappling with long-suppressed issues of racial discrimination, Holsey was appointed Director of Task Force 1 Navy, an organization created specifically to address racism and bias in the naval service. His selection for this role wasn't ceremonial. It reflected the Navy's recognition that substantive change required leaders who understood both the institution and the lived experience of discrimination. In 2021, Holsey became Commander of Navy Personnel Command and Deputy Chief of Naval Personnel, overseeing the careers of hundreds of thousands of sailors. This wasn't a combat command, but it was arguably more important. He controlled promotions, assignments, and retention for the entire naval service. By 2023, he was Military Deputy Commander of United States Southern Command, second in command of all U.S. military operations across Latin America and the Caribbean. And on November 7, 2024, Admiral Alvin Holsey achieved what no black officer had accomplished in the command's 60-year history. He assumed command of United States Southern Command, becoming a 4-star admiral and the military leader responsible for U.S. operations across 31 countries and 16 dependencies, covering 16 million square miles. At his change of command ceremony, then Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin called it making history. The first woman commander of Southcom passes the baton to the first African-American commander of Southcom, Austin said. At 59 years old, Admiral Holsey stood at the pinnacle of a 37-year career built on merit, dedication, and an unshakable commitment to the Constitution he'd sworn to defend. His tenure was expected to last 3 years, the standard term for a combatant commander. It would last 11 months. When Donald Trump was inaugurated for his second term on January 20th, 2025, the military braced for change. The signals had been clear throughout the campaign. This administration viewed the military establishment with suspicion, believing it had been corrupted by what they called woke ideology. Within hours of the inauguration, the administration made its priorities unmistakable. Admiral Linda Fagan, the first woman to lead any branch of the U.S. military as Commandant of the Coast Guard, was fired. The Department of Homeland Security's official statement cited her excessive focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion as one reason for her removal. Trump appointed Pete Hegseth as Secretary of Defense. Hegseth, a former Fox News host and Army National Guard veteran who'd served in Iraq and Afghanistan, had written extensively about his belief that the military had been compromised by political correctness and diversity initiatives. In his book, The War on Warriors, he'd called for a wholesale purge of generals and admirals he deemed insufficiently focused on what he called war fighting. First of all, you've got to fire the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, Hegseth said in a podcast appearance in November 2024, months before his confirmation. Any general, admiral, whatever, that was involved in any of the diversity, equity, and inclusion nonsense has got to go. Either you're in for war fighting, and that's it. That's the only litmus test we care about. One of Hegseth's first symbolic acts was rebranding the Department of Defense as the Department of War. The change harked back to the department's original name before 1947, and while some viewed it as mere semantics, others saw it as a statement of intent. This would be an administration focused on aggressive military action, not measured diplomatic response. Admiral Holsey's first interaction with Secretary Hegseth came via secure video conference shortly after the inauguration. Multiple Pentagon officials and former officials would later describe the tone of that meeting to various news outlets. According to the Wall Street Journal, citing 2 Pentagon officials, Hegseth's message to Holsey was direct and unambiguous. You're either on the team or you're not. When you get an order, you move out fast and don't ask questions. For an officer who'd spent 37 years in an institution built on the fundamental principle that service members have not just the right, but the obligation to question unlawful orders, this was an ominous beginning. The Uniform Code of Military Justice is explicit. Following an illegal order is not a defense. It's a crime. In late August 2025, the United States began deploying naval forces to the Caribbean at a scale not seen in decades. 3 guided missile destroyers arrived off the coast of Venezuela. Within weeks, the force grew to include 3 amphibious assault ships, carrying about 6,000 sailors and Marines. F-35 fighter jets deployed to Puerto Rico. A nuclear-powered submarine carrying cruise missiles operated off South America. By mid-September, roughly 10,000 U.S. troops were positioned in and around the Caribbean, the largest American military buildup in Latin America since the Cold War. The stated mission was counter-narcotics. The Trump administration claimed it was targeting what it called narco-terrorists, specifically members of Tren de Aragua, a Venezuelan gang that the administration had designated as a foreign terrorist organization in January 2025. But the scale of the deployment suggested something far more ambitious than drug interdiction. Multiple news outlets reported that the real objective was regime change in Venezuela, aimed at removing President Nicolas Maduro from power. Then, on September 2, 2025, the mission took a lethal turn. President Trump announced from the White House that U.S. military forces had conducted a kinetic strike against positively identified Tren de Aragua narco-terrorists in the Southcom area of responsibility, posted a video to his Truth Social account showing a small boat in the Caribbean exploding in flames after being struck by what appeared to be a missile. Trump stated that all 11 people aboard were killed. He described them as Tren de Aragua narco-terrorists operating under the control of Venezuelan President Maduro. Secretary of State Marco Rubio confirmed the attack on social media, stating the vessel was operated by a designated narco-terrorist organization. Defense Secretary Hegseth praised the operation as the beginning of a new approach to combating drug trafficking. "If you are transporting substances that can kill Americans, we are hunting you," he wrote on social media. The Trump administration provided no evidence to support its claims about who was on the boat or what it was carrying. No photographs of controlled substances, no identification of the dead, no explanation of how the military had determined the individuals aboard were terrorists rather than ordinary smugglers, fishermen, or even innocent civilians. According to multiple reports, including from CNN and the New York Times, U.S. officials later acknowledged they did not know the identities of everyone on board the boats before they were struck. But there was something else about the September 2nd strike that the administration didn't publicly disclose, something that wouldn't become known until nearly 3 months later. According to sources who spoke to CNN and The Washington Post, the boat was struck twice. The first strike disabled the vessel and caused deaths. But there were survivors. 2 men who'd somehow lived through the initial attack were seen climbing back onto the burning wreckage. And then, according to The Washington Post citing 2 anonymous sources, a second strike was ordered. Defense Secretary Hegseth had allegedly given a verbal order to SEAL Team 6 conducting the operation, leave no survivors. The 2 men clinging to the wreckage of their boat were killed in what military terminology calls a double-tap strike, a follow-up attack designed to ensure complete destruction of the target. When pressed about this months later, the White House confirmed that Admiral Frank Bradley, who at the time headed Joint Special Operations Command, had ordered the second strike. White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt stated that Hegseth had authorized Bradley to conduct kinetic strikes, and that the survivors were determined to still be in the fight, and therefore valid targets. Legal experts who spoke to Reuters and the Associated Press were less equivocal in their assessment. They said the targeting of survivors could constitute a violation of international humanitarian law, which requires combatants to be protected once they're out of action. Maritime law is even more explicit about the duty to rescue persons in distress at sea. The strikes continued. September 15th, 3 more killed. September 16th, Trump announced a 3rd boat destroyed. September 26th, 4 more dead. October 11th, 6 killed in what Hegseth announced was the first night operation. October 28th, 14 people killed in coordinated strikes on 4 boats in the Eastern Pacific, the largest death toll in a single day. By early December 2025, the United States military had conducted at least 22 strikes on 23 vessels, killing at least 87 people. The administration claimed every single one was a narco-terrorist. They provided evidence for none of them. Admiral Holsey was overseeing this operation, but according to multiple sources who spoke to The Intercept, he'd been effectively sidelined. The strikes were being conducted by Special Operations Command, which was coordinating directly with the Pentagon rather than through normal Southcom channels. Holsey was reportedly being read in late on operations, provided with inadequate information, and forced to coordinate with Special Operations Command on minimal notice. 3 government officials with knowledge of the situation told The Intercept that people at Southcom were angry and disillusioned. The tension between Hegseth and Holsey had been building for months. According to the Wall Street Journal, Hegseth believed Holsey wasn't moving quickly or aggressively enough to combat drug trafficking. He complained about not being given the information he needed about operations, but Southcom was concerned about whether the operations were even lawful. Holsey had another problem. He'd spent 33 years conducting counter-drug operations in the Caribbean. During his Senate confirmation hearing in September 2024, he'd testified about his desire for a stronger approach to dismantle drug cartels. He'd told senators he wanted to increase interdictions, but interdiction meant stopping vessels, boarding them, seizing contraband, and arresting suspects for prosecution. It didn't mean summary execution without trial, without evidence, without even confirming the identities of those being killed. The admiral was also reportedly concerned about operational control. Some of the strikes were being conducted by units that weren't under his direct command. If something went wrong, if civilians were killed, if the operations violated international law, he would still bear responsibility as the geographic combatant commander. But he didn't have full authority over the forces conducting the strikes. There was also the matter of leaks. Hegseth suspected Holsey might be the source of media reports that were critical of the boat-bombing campaign. According to the Wall Street Journal, by the time the strikes began in September, Hegseth had already lost confidence in the admiral. On October 6, 2025, the situation came to a head. Hegseth, Holsey, and Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff Dan Kane met at the Pentagon in what sources described as a tense confrontation. According to CNN, citing a source familiar with the meeting, Holsey raised his concerns about the legality of the strikes during this meeting. He offered to resign. The offer was initially tabled, and Holsey's departure wasn't announced for another 10 days, but the damage was done. The Wall Street Journal reported, citing 2 Pentagon officials, that Hegseth asked Holsey to step down. It was what one official called a de facto ouster that was the culmination of months of discord between Hegseth and the officer. On October 16, 2025, Defense Secretary Hegseth announced Admiral Holsey's retirement on social media. On behalf of the Department of War, we extend our deepest gratitude to Admiral Alvin Holsey for his more than 37 years of distinguished service to our nation as he plans to retire at year's end, Hegseth wrote. His tenure as military deputy commander and now commander of United States Southern Command reflects a legacy of operational excellence and strategic vision. An hour later, Southcom released a statement from Holsey. It's been an honor to serve our nation, the American people, and support and defend the Constitution for over 37 years, he wrote. The Southcom team has made lasting contributions to the defense of our nation and will continue to do so. I am confident that you will forge ahead, focused on your mission that strengthens our nation and ensures its longevity as a beacon of freedom around the globe. Neither statement gave a reason for his departure. A Pentagon spokesperson told reporters they had no additional information beyond Hegseth's post. The spokesperson did not say who would replace Holsey. When asked directly, another Pentagon official told the Daily Beast that Admiral Holsey was not fired. He was asked to retire on good terms. Since that time, the team has worked in harmony. We are grateful for his service to our nation, and we wish him well in his future endeavors. Pentagon spokesperson Sean Parnell went further, calling reports that Holsey had raised concerns about the boat strikes fake news and a total lie. Never happened, Parnell wrote on social media. There was no hesitation or concerns about this mission. The New York Times official communications account replied, "We are confident in our reporting." Admiral Holsey himself has remained completely silent since announcing his retirement. He has declined all interview requests. He has made no public statements. He has not confirmed or denied the reports about his objections to the strikes. His retirement became effective December 12, 2025. Holsey's forced departure came during the largest operation he'd overseen in his entire career. Removing a combatant commander in the middle of a major military operation is virtually unprecedented in modern American military history. Having him leave at this particular moment, at the height of what the Pentagon considers to be the central action in our hemisphere, is just shocking. Todd Robinson, who was Assistant Secretary for International Narcotics and Law Enforcement Affairs until January 2025, told the Wall Street Journal. Senator Jack Reed, of Rhode Island, the top Democrat on the Senate Armed Services Committee, said in a statement that Holsey's resignation was troubling. At a moment when U.S. forces are building up across the Caribbean and tensions with Venezuela are at a boiling point, the departure of our top military commander in the region sends an alarming signal of instability within the chain of command, Reed said. Admiral Holsey's resignation only deepens my concern that this administration is ignoring the hard-earned lessons of previous U.S. military campaigns and the advice of our most experienced warfighters. Representative Adam Smith of Washington, the ranking Democrat on the House Armed Services Committee, said, Never before in my over 20 years on the committee can I recall seeing a combatant commander leave their post this early and amid such turmoil. Holsey wasn't the only senior military leader pushed out. He was part of a pattern. On February the 21st, 2025, President Trump fired Air Force General Charles Q. Brown, Jr., the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and only the second black man to hold that position. Minutes later, Hegseth announced he'd fired Admiral Lisa Franchetti, the Chief of Naval Operations and the first woman to serve on the Joint Chiefs of Staff. He also fired Air Force General James Slife, the Vice Chief of Staff, and requested nominations to replace the Judge Advocates General for the Army, Navy, and Air Force, the military's top lawyers. Franchetti had been specifically targeted by Hegseth in his book, The War on Warriors, where he'd written, "If naval operations suffer, at least we can hold our heads high, because at least we have another first." The first female member of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Hooray. For social justice ideologues, public relations matters more than reality. Admiral Holsey was one of only 2 black 4-star officers leading a U.S. combatant command at the time of his removal. His departure, combined with the firing of Brown and Franchetti, and the earlier dismissal of Coast Guard Commandant Admiral Linda Fagan, meant that within 10 months, the Trump administration had removed or forced out the most senior black man in the military, the most senior woman in the military, and the first black commander of Southcom, along with numerous other senior officers. Holsey's removal raises questions that remain unanswered. Did he actually object to the legality of the boat strikes? The administration says no. Multiple news outlets citing Pentagon sources say yes. Did he offer to resign, or was he forced out? Sources give conflicting accounts. Was his removal related to his concerns about the operations, or was it about the administration's broader campaign against diversity in the military? What is not disputed is this: a highly decorated 4-star admiral with an unblemished 37-year career, a man who'd commanded at every level from squadron to carrier strike group to combatant command, was removed from his position 1 year into what should have been a 3-year tenure. He was removed during the largest military operation in his area of responsibility in decades, and he was removed after reportedly raising concerns about whether those operations complied with U.S. and international law. The boat strikes continue. As of early December 2025, at least 87 people have been killed. The Trump administration has not provided public evidence that any of them were terrorists. It has not identified the dead. It has not shown proof that the boats were carrying controlled substances. When a Colombian family filed a complaint with a regional rights body claiming their relative, a fisherman named Alejandro Carranza, was wrongfully killed in a U.S. strike, the administration dismissed it without addressing the substance of the claim. The administration's legal justification for the strikes rests on a notification Trump sent to Congress on October 1, 2025, declaring that the United States is in a non-international armed conflict with unlawful combatants, specifically targeting cartels. This designation, if accepted, would allow the military to target individuals designated as enemy combatants even when they pose no immediate threat. But legal experts have questioned whether violent criminals can properly be classified as combatants in an armed conflict. The designation appears designed specifically to circumvent the legal protections that would normally apply to law enforcement operations. United Nations human rights experts issued a warning that the strikes could violate fundamental international norms, emphasizing that all states must respect the right to life, including when acting on the high seas or in foreign territory. On December 12, 2025, Admiral Alvin Holsey officially retired from the United States Navy after 37 years, 1 month, and 12 days of service. He did not speak at his retirement ceremony. He issued no final statement. He gave no interviews. The Navy honored him with the traditional ceremonies accorded to 4-star admirals, but there was an unmistakable undercurrent to the proceedings. Everyone present knew this wasn't a planned retirement. This was a forced departure of a commander who'd asked the wrong questions. Admiral Holsey's story raises fundamental questions about civilian control of the military. about the limits of lawful orders, about what happens when military officers believe their civilian leadership is directing them to violate the law. The American military system is built on a crucial balance. Civilian leaders make policy decisions. Military officers execute those decisions. But officers also take an oath to support and defend the Constitution, not any individual leader. When those principles come into conflict, when an officer believes an order is unlawful, the system depends on officers having the courage to raise objections. If the reports about Admiral Holsey are accurate, he did exactly that. He raised concerns about operations he believed fell into murky legal territory. He questioned whether targeting survivors clinging to wreckage complied with the laws of armed conflict. He objected to conducting lethal strikes without confirmation of targets. For this, according to multiple sources, he was removed from command. The alternative narrative, offered by the administration, is that Holsey was simply asked to retire with no connection to his performance or any disagreement about operations, that he left on good terms, that reports of tension between him and Hegseth are fabricated by a media hostile to the administration. But if that's true, it raises different questions. Why remove a combatant commander 1 year into a 3-year term? Why do it during the largest operation in his area of responsibility? Why refuse to name a replacement for weeks after his departure? Why would Pentagon sources, speaking anonymously to multiple news outlets, consistently describe tension, discord, and concerns about legality? Admiral Holsey's silence on these questions is itself notable. Military officers, even retired ones, rarely criticize their civilian leadership publicly. The military culture emphasizes loyalty, discretion, and respect for the chain of command. But Holsey's silence may also reflect something else, a recognition that speaking out would accomplish nothing except damage his own reputation and violate the professional standards he'd upheld for nearly 4 decades. What is certain is that Admiral Alvin Holsey's career ended not with the celebration and honor typically accorded to 4-star officers, but with questions, controversy, and a departure that satisfied no one. The first black commander of United States Southern Command served for 11 months. His tenure will be remembered not for what he accomplished, but for how it ended. And the questions he reportedly raised about the legality of military operations, about the duty to question unlawful orders, about the limits of executive power, remain as relevant today as they were when he allegedly posed them in that October meeting at the Pentagon.